Reparative genealogy, what it is, why it matters. Let's begin with learning a little bit about the harsh realities of slavery so everyone has a full context of why reparative genealogy is needed so badly. So everyone can understand the systematic destruction of Black families that happened historically in America and to some extent is still happening today. Everyone also needs to know exactly what you would be getting into if you work on reparative genealogy. During the work, there is no way to escape from the truth of slavery and racism. It is present in some way in every single document we work with. Honestly, those of us who do this work every day have days where we cry and lots of days where we are very, very angry. But we temper that by looking for as many nuggets of joy as we can and by celebrating every single new family connection made. Why do we need reparative genealogy? It is estimated that the United States of America enslaved more than 10 million people of African descent during its pre-Civil War history. On a regular basis, those family members were sold away from each other, often never to see each other again. Children were sold away from parents, husbands from wives. These enslaved Americans' lives were very poorly documented. They were often only a tick mark on a page or a first name on a list. It will take dedicated genealogists using unique research techniques to reconnect every enslaved American with their families through a family tree. It is past time to repair the families America shattered. Black Americans have been willfully excluded from the genealogy space since the time of slavery through today. Many genealogy organizations did not allow Black Americans as members until the 1970s or 1980s. Document repositories are still denying access to their records for Black Americans. Most genealogy website formats do not meet the needs of Black Americans with enslaved ancestors. It is past time to make the genealogy space fully inclusive. America is hurting due to generational trauma from slavery and racism, not just the Black community, but also those whose families enslaved others and committed racist acts. Acknowledgement of what happened in the past is the first step to healing. Genealogy is a tool that can bring the truth to light and allow us to process the emotions and trauma that go along with the truth. It is past time to tell the full story of slavery and racism in America. It is time to heal. A little history. Before embarking on a reparative genealogy journey, a short history lesson in how America got to where we are now can be helpful. It is also important to stress again that you are going to see many of the horrible things mentioned here in slavery-era documents, so none of this can be avoided during reparative genealogy. Slavery began in earnest in the United States of America in 1619, over 400 years ago, when the first slaves were imported from Africa. It was before the USA was its own country, and the land was still owned by the British, or more accurately, the indigenous population. USA history of slavery goes back even farther into British history, as well as other countries around the world. The USA didn't invent the importation of slave labor. Many countries used slave labor to expand colonization and economic growth. Laws were constantly changed regarding slavery to benefit enslavers and to keep slaves oppressed, and in America, those laws varied from state to state. But here is the most important thing you need to know about slavery in general. It was first and foremost an economic strategy. What better way is there to grow your wealth than through free labor? And in order to stay free of the guilt of enslaving people and amassing that wealth, enslavers had to first make sure those humans were no longer human. This technique is called dehumanization. It treats a group of people as if they don't have the mental capacity or cultural refinements to be human, which means equating them with animals. Here are some ways America tried to free themselves from the guilt of slavery. Enslaved Americans were constantly compared to apes and monkeys. This is a racial slur that is still often used today. They were considered a commodity and were bought, sold, and documented like cattle on a farm. They were stripped of their native names, language, and culture and forced to embrace American culture. Not only were their names stripped, they were most often given new names. Their children were usually named by the slave owner, and they generally were not given last names. Forced isolation. They were not allowed to leave the slave owner's property. Widespread physical, emotional, sexual, and mental abuse. Forced separation of family members, especially through selling the family away from each other. People claimed slaves were lazy and unwilling or unable to take care of themselves if set free. They were not allowed any kind of education. During certain time periods, teaching a slave to read was illegal. People who visited Africa came back with stories of how Africans lived like animals, spreading the word that they were better off as slaves. They were denied citizenship. The dehumanization continued after slavery. Jim Crow laws, forced segregation, black codes enforcing racial segregation, and separate but equal laws were everywhere, not just the South. Lynchings were common. Photos of lynchings were even taken and kept as souvenirs. Abundance of groups like KKK and white supremacists existed to keep the black community afraid, and as we know, these groups still exist all over the country today. Individual white supremacy attitudes and behaviors were encouraged to keep the black community afraid. Black Americans were denied basic rights as U.S. citizens. Black Americans were generally considered as criminals, often arrested for being black while doing everyday things, and arrested for crimes they didn't commit. This still continues across the country today. Thriving black families were driven off their lands, from their homes, and out of town to inhibit success. Black community massacres occurred across the country throughout time and into the early 1900s. The irony is, by dehumanizing slaves, white Americans became inhumane themselves, which is the cause of much of the unacknowledged generational trauma we carry today. The good news is people can address this generational trauma by working on reparative genealogy. Before we talk about the specifics of reparative genealogy, it's important to talk about what reparative genealogy is not. It is not pronouncing ourselves as individuals guilty for past slavery and racism crimes we did not commit. It is not shaming or blaming, as this does not help America move forward and does not help reconnect families. It is not stepping in to help where we aren't wanted. If you have not been invited into a particular space, you simply don't go there. It is not forcing reparations or a specific type of reparations on descendants who don't want them. Who should do reparative genealogy? Everyone with genealogy skills, who is willing to learn genealogy skills, or who is willing to pay a genealogist to research enslaved Americans and their families. It is imperative that good genealogy practices are used to ensure the accuracy of the research and the family trees. Everyone who is interested in retroactive justice for enslaved Americans through restoring the family trees. Everyone who is interested in using genealogy to make a meaningful impact on America and racism today. Reparative genealogy can be done by everyone, regardless of whether your ancestors enslaved others. Reparative genealogy is acknowledgement of the past and the full truth of the experiences of enslaved Americans. In some cases, we research our own family history with the goal of acknowledging our own family's role in slavery. For others, we research with the goal of acknowledging America's role in slavery. We acknowledge where we are at regarding our understanding of Black Americans, racism, and slavery, and we pledge to do better. Reparative genealogy is the repair of family trees. Because family members were unlinked from each other due to slavery and racism, reparative genealogy seeks to fix those broken links by building family trees. In many cases, this means learning how to do painstaking slavery-era research. This work can't make a difference to the families of generations ago, but it can make a difference to the descendants who are living today. Reparative genealogy is in itself a form of reparations. By rebuilding the family trees, we seek to give back to the Black community what was taken from them. We seek to return their ancestors who may have been lost due to slavery and racism. Reparative genealogy is honoring enslaved Americans who built America as well as their resilient descendants. By calling their names and placing them in family trees, we seek to honor the enslaved Americans who built this country through their blood, sweat, and tears. We seek to honor their strength and resilience and the strength of their descendants who have all survived in a world that did its best to dehumanize and diminish them. We seek to tell the stories of America's forefathers and foremothers. Reparative genealogy is correcting social injustice through genealogy. Although genealogy can't fix everything, we can widen the genealogy space for Black Americans by building a strong foundation for every person to begin their family tree. We can make doing genealogy just as easy for them as it is for everyone else. Currently, it is a struggle for many Black Americans to get past their grandparents. By increasing the presence of Black genealogy in all genealogy spaces and publicly acknowledging the ongoing segregation in the genealogy space, we seek to close the gap that separates Black Americans from the full experience of genealogy. Reparative genealogy is creating a better understanding of the history and impact of social justice through genealogy. By working on Black genealogy, especially slavery-era work, Americans can gain a stronger understanding of the history of current-day racism and social injustice. They can gain a deeper understanding of the generational impact slavery and racism have had on the Black community and America as a whole. Reparative genealogy is a vehicle for healing the trauma of slavery and racism. By growing our understanding of the causes and impacts of slavery and trauma, by telling a more accurate narrative, by facing head-on the injustices America perpetrated upon an entire community, we seek healing. Generations have been traumatized by the social injustice, not just the Black community, but also those who stood by and watched it happen. Feelings of shame, guilt, confusion, and helplessness have all been passed down. And although these feelings cannot compare to those the Black community have suffered, it is pain nonetheless that needs to be addressed so the real work can begin. So America can stop being frozen with inaction by feelings they may not even understand. And for everyone involved, reparative genealogy can be life-changing. I guarantee your life will not be the same after you have begun reparative genealogy.